Welcome, Katie Scott from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. We're delighted to have you here with us doing our latest interview as part of the Are We There Yet projects with ShapingEDU at Arizona State University. Trying, as the sign says behind me, capturing the evolving new now and learning. I understand from you and your colleagues at the Monterey Bay Aquarium that you faced quite an interesting transition when the pandemic hit, from having students coming on site to not wanting to lose that. So let's take you back to March of 2020. Talk just a little bit about what the program looked like in terms of the outreach and education the aquarium did, and how you responded when all of a sudden it was like, no more kids are coming into the building.
Before the pandemic, we had education programs kind of separated into four main program categories. We had school programs, which are like our field trip programs. So seeing around 90,000 kids a year coming through. We had just built in April 2019, we had just finished and opened our new Bechtel Center for Ocean Education and Leadership, which was allowing us to actually have facilitated programs for every student who came on a field trip to the aquarium. So they were getting an hour-long program in our amazing new state-of-the-art LEED Gold building. And we also had programs for teens in the summer and after school, for middle and high school students specifically. We were seeing probably about 1,000 of teens in those programs a year. We were seeing about 1,500 to 2,000 teachers in our educator programs. So we had educator programs that were year-long programs starting in the summer and going throughout the school year. And then we also have workshops happening and summits. And then we also had STEM programs, which we had just started to launch we have a maker space in our new building called the Ocean Innovation Lab. And so we were starting to try some new things with STEM integration and with technology and engineering kind of at the lead. And so we were doing all of this stuff and a very little bit of distance learning. So we had been for the previous, 5 or 6 years doing some work with distance learning. And one of the initiatives we were just starting, because we were kind of in this place where we were growing our programs and growing our division, we were interested in working with students who couldn't physically get to the aquarium. And so we had identified some target populations, students in hospitals who were long-term in hospitals, students in juvenile detention centers, and students in extremely rural areas, which we defined as more than 150 miles from the nearest aquarium. And what we were going to do was start developing programming for those students to help connect them to the ocean when there was no other way for them to feel that connection. And so we were just starting a project, doing some program development with, we had just reached out to the hospital school at the Lucille Packard Stanford Children's Hospital. And we had just started doing some front-end interviews with kind of the teachers over there. And we were starting to think about, what would we do with students who can't actually get here? And then the pandemic.
You're pointing out something I've heard from other people that I've interviewed so far and expect to hear from others. The idea that flexibility and having multiple paths available to you as you looked into a totally uncertain future was key to the success you had. Can you speak to what was institutionally in place that supported that level of flexibility?
Yeah, honestly, I would say there were three things that really were key. Looking back, that we were just very lucky, frankly. One of them was, as I mentioned, we were thinking about how do we support, these students who can't get to the aquarium. We had already been thinking about that and doing some trial runs and some testing with ways to support them using technology. And previously, we had done a lot of work and evaluation, just kind of piloting different kinds of distance learning. And one of our concerns was we wanted to make sure like our pedagogy at the aquarium is very much centered in student agency, student-centered, project-based work, things that are difficult to do online, right? We don't want to lecture to kids. We don't want to, we wanted things to be engaging and interactive, give the class away as soon as possible, let the kids lead it. That's our pedagogy. And so for years we had been trying to test distance learning that allowed us to do that. So we had done some distance learning where we had tiny little cameras like in tanks with different animals. And so you'd see on the screen like the snail cam and the abalone cam and all that stuff. We had tried all this stuff. And what we found was that it was really staff intensive to do that. And so we had kind of pulled back from doing that. And most of our distance learning was we were supporting classes who maybe they only had an hour to come to the aquarium. So we do an online program for them before they came, and then they could spend their whole hour like in the aquarium. But when we were looking at these, for example, students in hospital schools, we started thinking, okay, we need to figure this out. Like, how are we going to do some engaging, interactive distance learning with these students who can't get here? And so we started looking at online courses and different ways to use online courses. And there was a software called Thinkific that we started testing that allowed us to kind of build courses and utilize videos and have some kind of engagement back and forth with students in a way that we liked. And so we started testing that with our homeschool audience. Actually, we have at the time, homeschool families could get free tickets to the aquarium. And so and we used to do a facilitated program for them, but it was always difficult because there were so many different ages and so many different needs. So we were like, well, let's test this. And so we put together an online course for them. And then we also put together an online course for some teachers who had come to a professional development, but lived very far away. And so they couldn't come back for follow-up sessions. So we started using that kind of like online course. Let's see how we can connect with folks far away and still be really engaging. So that was one thing we were already thinking about and doing. And again, we were just in the beginning phase of that. The second thing is that because we had just moved into this big building, the aquarium had invested a lot of money into education programs. And so for the previous 3 years, we had been building our staff and we had been developing programs. We actually had a staff member who her entire job was leading program development. And so she had come in and worked with us to develop a process for rapid creation and iteration of programs based in kind of the tech industry. We were doing sprints. We were doing, just rapid iteration of developing something, modifying it, testing it, developing it, modifying it, testing it. And that process had trained all of our educators and our staff to be used to rapid iteration and okay with failing in front of each other. Because before that, as educators, when we teach, we want everybody who's observing us to teach to think we're great. And so we had spent 3 years teaching in front of our colleagues and just, failing miserably and then unpacking, what could we do better? So we had this kind of process and we had this culture of iteration built in our team. And then the third thing is we brought in, around that time, we hired a new director who's now our vice president of education. Our vice president of education at the time has now retired, Jenny De La Hoz. And Jenny has a background in equity, environmental work and equity. And she kind of brought in a new culture for our division where we were kind of decentering white supremacy culture and centering trust and just kind of doing things a little bit differently in how we engaged and worked with one another. There was a much more transparent culture of work. And again, a much more comfort with being authentic in front of one another and iterating in front of one another and trying new things. And so I think all three of those things, which we weren't doing in preparation for this, but we happened to be doing at that time, all of them kind of coalesced to be kind of a perfect storm for helping us pivot in the moment. How do we center the expertise that teachers have, which is a deep and real expertise that should be valued? And how do we leverage technology to help them do their job better? I think that sometimes we think about those two things in opposition. Yeah.
Thanks. Any last minute tips for people in terms of saying, okay, here's the one thing I want you to remember from this whole conversation?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is, things are going to get blown up. Things are going to change. There's never a normal. There wasn't a normal before the pandemic, and there's not going to be a normal after the pandemic. And so being as flexible as you can, being willing to being ready and prepared for iteration and change, and finding the joy in iteration. I think that's the biggest thing that our team has done well, where we can laugh at like, oh, that went terrible. What did we learn from that? Like, let's talk about our own learning and how we grew from that experience. And let's center our relationship in that. Like, even though that thing I just led with you all was terrible, like, let's still be friends about it and help me get better next time. Right. Yeah.
Wonderful. Katie, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for sharing all the wonderful things that you and your colleagues have been seeing there at the aquarium. I'll end the recording. We'll hang just for a minute or two for a quick debrief. And I want to get over to the aquarium and play with some more starfish.
Yeah. Come on over. See our sea otters.
Thank you so much.